Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to take a quick poll to see if you all can hear me. If so, you could write in the question box on the side of your screen.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. All right, yes, so that's great. We'll give folks a couple more minutes to, so everybody can get on. Hope you're all having a good day. Great. Charlotte's having a great day. That's what I like to hear. Yes. So real quick, just to uh, keep the conversation going. How did folks hear about this webinar? What made you sign up? Okay, the email list. All right. Suggestions. That's what we like. Word of mouth suggestions is great. All right.
Using everyday democracy at your campus. That's great.
All right. What school is that? The where you guys use everyday democracy tools on your campus? Oh, Facebook. Yes. Our communications folks would be happy to hear about that. Oh, okay. Okay. Great. Got trained facilitators. Mike in here now, there's different people who are getting involved in different ways. It's excellent. Okay. All right. Oh, wow. I wish I was around here when we were in Miami. Okay. All right, Elizabeth. Yeah. All right. All right. So we're gonna get ready to get going here. Thanks for the feedback. So get a quick gauge of who's around. We have facilitators, people who got email blasts, people who have been using our tools. That's great. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. There's still some people coming in, but we don't want to, we want to make sure we respect everyone's time here. So as we begin, so we are your presenters today. My name is Matthew Sagacity Walker. I'm the Community Assistance Associate here at Everyday Democracy. My role here is I do not the original intake. I do the intake process with folks who are looking to partner with us, as well as I help with data collection and other things around the office.
And my name is Milana Rogers-Burson. I'm the Program Associate at Everyday Democracy here in the office. I am doing work around intergenerational equity and kind of developing a framework around that and trying to implement it in different communities, and also doing follow-up work with communities across the country who we haven't talked with in a while. So it's good to hear about someone's on the call from Miami. It'd be great to follow up with any communities that we've worked with in the past.
Definitely. All right, so as we keep moving here, some quick housekeeping things. Everybody right now is muted because we're expecting over 100 people on this webinar, so it'll get pretty confused when everyone talking back and forth. But if you do have any questions or comments, please put them in the question box, as some of you already have. We're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. When we can, we'll answer your questions in real time, but if not, we're making notes and we will get to the questions, as many questions as we can before the end of the webinar. We have actual questions, appointed time for questions at the end of this webinar as well. And also, once the webinar is completed, we do have a survey, so if you would please be kind to take the survey at the end, we'd really appreciate it. We'd like to know how well we're doing. We want to do more webinars, and anything that we can do to improve would be excellent. As well as this webinar will be recorded, so you could have access to it at any time. We'll send you the link for it. So, getting going here at Everyday Democracy, our vision is to make sure that everyone's voices are valued while they're participating in their local, state, and national levels in terms of how our democracy works, how they want to see their community work, how they want to see their states work, and how we want to see our country run as a whole. And while we do that work, we always keep an eye on racial equity. I'll talk a bit more about racial equity later on, and it's a key component to everything that we do in our work. Really quickly about our organization, we started in 1989. We're coming up on 30 years. We started out as Study Circles Resource Center. We've worked in over 600 communities all across the United States where we do a dialogue to change process. And again, we integrate a racial equity lens in every aspect of our work, from all of our trainings, all of our coaching. And we are big with working on different communities. When we say individual communities, we're talking about it could be a community program, a community organization, and sometimes it's a group of community members who get together and say we want to work on a particular issue, and they begin to form a group, and that's who we'll work with. And then we also work with anchor partners, which are organizations who they have their own mission and they're doing their own thing, but they really want to embed the type of work that we do in our dialogue process and skills into their ordinary workflow. As an organization, some of the big buckets that we're working on for the 2018 are criminal justice, education, leadership development, and sustainability. We have a few large initiatives in criminal justice and education right now that we'll be working on, and we're partnering with the Nellie Mae Education Foundation on education, and we're also partnering with the MacArthur Foundation on a criminal justice initiative. And we practice leadership development, and we look for sustainability anytime we do work, whether it's a one-off program or just a training. We're always looking for the next generation of leaders, and we try to, as Milana mentioned earlier, we try to work through an intergenerational equity lens as well to make sure young folks and elders are able to share their thoughts and concerns and be a part of our process. So now, a rundown of our day. We're going to begin talking about, traditional community engagement. We're going to do this pretty broad brushstroke-wise because with community engagement, we can get into many different facets. So what we're going to do is just talk about the, main elements of community engagement and how people usually see them. Then we'll talk a bit about the theory behind our process, which is the dialogue to change process, and why we believe the dialogue to change process is valuable and it works. And lastly, we'll talk about some outcomes. We'll give outcomes in general, and we'll also give a few concrete examples of how communities across the nation have used our dialogue process.
So just to start out, we want to ask you all a question. At Everyday Democracy, we're, like Sagasti said, we're focusing on community engagement, racial equity, and problem solving. And we want to make sure that people of all parts of the community have a voice and decision-making power. But we're curious, how have you seen issues addressed in your own community? And you can write your answers in the question box.
I'll give you a couple minutes to do that.
So how do you see problems solved in your community? So again, so it's the open dialogue, that's great. Often by subject matter experts on a panel, so talking to audiences, panels, film screenings, coalitions of different groups, in public input process, city council, we have a lot of things coming in, advocacy, town hall meetings, we have that again.
One-time conversations about crime in Clearwater.
Okay.
All right.
So we see the town hall meetings, protests, dialogues, mediation.
Mediation, okay. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Great.
Thanks for your responses. So that relates to a lot of the things that we want to talk about. So the first Yeah, go ahead. So the first kind of way that we sometimes see problem solved, which is, is this top-down model. And the top-down approach is really people coming together to make policy decisions and behind closed doors. And it's a lot of times those people who are already in power, they don't necessarily reach out for input. And, a lot of people, I think, in our country right now are frustrated by this and kind of feeling like they don't have a say, they don't have a voice, and like their opinion doesn't matter, or it only matters during elections. And then some people don't even feel like their voice matters during elections. So a lot of you mentioned the town hall meetings, and so this is a way that sometimes, people, elected officials are trying to gather that input from community. So you might see a lot of people in one room and everybody only gets about 3 minutes to say their piece. And it's not necessarily very inclusive. So, I mean, it is a way to get some input, but you often have the same people who are talking over and over, the people who feel the most comfortable to speak in that environment. You don't necessarily have engagement, between the community, between the elected officials, between community members and other community members. And you don't have that process to really delve into the issue more deeply. So it is a start, but it doesn't necessarily foster that real engagement. And then you also see from the bottom up. So this is often a response to the top-down approach. People are coming together to oppose those decisions, policies that are made by those in power without their voice. And so, people are frustrated, and this is more like protest or direct action. We do see this approach sometimes. So, people have been effective in changing policy, changing culture from protest, but it doesn't necessarily answer the question of how do we really embed this engagement on a daily basis. Sometimes people are still coming out, on that one-time basis, and it can often be reactive rather than proactive. So with our approach, we're really trying to think about how do we let people have that voice on a regular basis, kind of every day in their communities, in local communities too, and not just on like big national policy level. So we want to give you an example to start out with a story from one of our communities. We worked in this community called Pajarito Mesa. It's in New Mexico, and we were working on early childhood. The initiative was called Strong Starts for Children, and we worked in 5 different communities in New Mexico. So Pajarito Mesa is a very small community, only 1,500 residents, and many of them are from Mexico and Central America. So they actually organized a dialogue of 70 people to participate, and so they had 6 different circles, and about 10 to 12 people in each circle, and that was a pretty big group for a 1,500 person community. And another thing to say about Pajarito Mesa is that it's also a community with very little infrastructure, so they have very little electricity, no running water, no paved or named roads, and they didn't have a shelter for their children who are dropped off by the school bus at the end of the day, and then also facing racism towards Latin American immigrants. And so through those dialogues, they were really able to organize this coalition of different actors in the community, including the county commissioner's office and many local residents. And so through those dialogues, they came up with a number of actions, and we're able to accomplish some of those actions to create change. So the first one is that the county commissioner's office actually donated a portable schoolhouse, and then an after-school program also donated services for children. So they were able to have a shelter for children who are being dropped off, and also have after-school services. They also collaborated with the county emergency services and to use GPS to better identify dirt roads. So that made it more possible to respond to emergencies quickly. Before, without the paved or named roads, it was really hard to get to people. And then they also, the county commissioner's office agreed to support another round of dialogues to think about development and to make sure that the community was really engaged in what that development would look like, because as you probably know, in a lot of places, development kind of happens from that top down.
All right, so what I would like to do is get into talking about how our process actually works. When I'm talking to people for the first time about the dialogue to change process. I like to break it down as simply as possible because it can be it takes a lot of work to get it accomplished. So we start with organizing, then we move to dialogue, and then we move to action. So those are the three main phases of our work: organizing, dialogue, and action. And we have it in a circle here because we like to say you can use our model and our process to address as many different issues as many times as you would like. And that's why it's a circle, and all of this will lead to positive community change. So why does our approach work? We like to believe our approach works because we are talking about including many voices. We believe that if you have different people who have different perspectives, different life views, and different experiences, they're able to have a conversation about what they want for their community. And because we have these differences and our voices are all valued, we have a more equitable outcome. And as Milana mentioned earlier, since a lot of times the things that happen in communities are from the top down, the fact that we're able to have these different people together to have these conversations, it's no longer top down, and that's the reason why the solution is more equitable for everybody and more fair for everyone. We also build relationships between one another during the dialogue process. I'll speak more about the specifics, but a dialogue process does take a few weeks to get accomplished with just the dialogue. So people are building relationships with neighbors, getting to know one another that they might not have known before. Service providers get to know their audience better. The audience gets to know the service providers better. Elected officials sometimes get involved, and so they get to know their constituents better, and the constituents get to know them better. And we also help build community capacity. Everyday Democracy does not do the work for folks. What we do is we offer training and coaching, and we provide the skills and services needed so that the communities can do the work on their own. Once we do our trainings and coaching, we like to, leave them with the ability to continue on doing dialogue circles even with our absence. And then, again, this is the racial equity piece, which is really big to our work. We believe that racism is a part of our society, and, structural racism affects us in many different ways. So in order for us to move forward and do anything that benefits the community in a positive manner, we're going to have to address racism. So we address racial equity, so we incorporate a racial equity lens in every aspect of our work. So just to, reiterate this point about the importance of equity, we like to add this slide in because sometimes equity gets confused with certain things like diversity or equality. I believe that diversity is, just making sure that there's different people. So we can have different people show up at the table, whether it be organizing or, to the dialogue circles, but that doesn't address the racial and cultural dynamics that may take place in that space. So with racial equity, we're taking it a step further and saying that it's not just having the people at the table, it's about that value of the voices of the people at the table and being as accommodating as possible to make the most marginalized voices, the voices that have been most marginalized in the past, making sure we don't continue to do that in any way, shape, or form. And equity is also not the same as equality, because equality connotes, it's the same. Everybody's getting the same thing, as the picture illustrates. All of the children do not need the same size box. The smaller child still cannot see over the fence, so therefore equality is not going to be beneficial for them in this circumstance. Whereas equity is more about fairness and justice. It's giving each person what they need to be successful. So we have to be very clear on whether or not we want everyone to be as successful as possible. In order to do that, we have to get input from everyone. So that is that. And also, just to bring this up, you can ask questions throughout, so it's not as one-sided. So feel free to, ask questions throughout this webinar as you see fit. Continuing on about our process, here's how it works. As I said, we break it down into three main phases, and these are the steps that take place during the organizing phase. We focus on goal setting. We have some trainings in there, and there's a lot of recruitment. And once that's completed, we have a kickoff event, and that's pretty much letting the community know that we are going to be holding these dialogue circles, and the dialogue circles are going to be about this particular issue. And, for this, you want to have family-friendly entertainment. You want to have a few public officials, elected officials, music. And you could also recruit more people to be involved in the dialogue process. And then we actually have the dialogues. These circles here, they represent different dialogue circles. You can have as many dialogue circles as you feel comfortable hosting going on at the same time. What we say is, it's good if you have 10 different dialogue circles going on. Make sure that you have enough resources to support those 10 dialogues. Sometimes it's better to start off with just, 2 or 3 smaller dialogue circles. And then once you see how that goes, adding, more as you can. Because as I mentioned earlier, you can continuously do this as long as you would like. And then we have our action forum. And during the action forum, that is at the end of the dialogues, people have these action ideas on what they would like to do and how they could solve this problem. And you had all these different dialogue circles taking place during this around about the same amount of time. So when they're all finished, all the different groups come together and they vote on which action ideas are the most practical and are the ones that they should and could be able to be working on. And then they vote on the ideas, so that way, we keep the democratic process moving throughout. And then finally, when we're talking about how change happens in communities, we talk about individual change, collective action, and institutional and policy change. Milana's going to talk about this a little bit more in detail later on, but all these different steps is what it takes. We want people to change as individuals, we want the group to change, and we also want the institutions to change and the policies to change. Because as I mentioned before, racism is a part of it's a deeply embedded fabric of our society. What we want to do is begin to start to change that from the individual to the institutions. So going a bit more in depth about organizing, we first build the coalition, and the coalition would be many people who are donating resources. That could be financial resources, space to hold the dialogue, space to hold meetings, food for the meetings, other things like that. You want to have an organizing team, and these people are the ones that will be doing the heavy lifting. These, they don't have to be any more than 10 or 12 or so people, and you'll have what we call a coordinator to make sure that all of the different folks on the organizing team are working together, and they handle the planning, logistics, recruitment, things of that nature. And we do an all-day organizing training with that organizing team. And then they go out, start recruiting participants for the dialogues, and they also recruit facilitators for the dialogues. When I talk about the difference between, looking at our participants and looking for facilitators will have to donate a bit more time to the dialogue process because they have to attend the all-day facilitator training, and they have to make sure they know the materials as well as facilitate the conversation. So you want somebody who has those skills somewhat already, whereas the dialogue participants, they can show up for the dialogue, and once the 6 sessions of dialogues are completed, they can go about their merry way, and they don't have to necessarily be a part of the action team or have to, make any heavy decisions. It's just more about being a member of their circle and having your voice be heard. So that's what I like to say in terms of who do you want to recruit, who has the most time that they're able to donate. And at any point, a participant may not have the time at one point, but they may want to join the action team, 3 or 4 months in later on. And I like to tell folks this phase can take about 4 to 6 months. We have seen it work sooner. It really depends on how many of the pieces do you already have in place. Do you already know some organizations or community partners that are willing to donate time and resources? Do you already know that there are some individuals that are able to donate the time to help plan these dialogues, things of that nature? If you have that, the organizing stage won't take as long. Then when we talk about the dialogues, this is what they actually look like. It's 2 facilitators per dialogue. Every dialogue has about 10 to 12 participants. And these are the people that we want to make sure that they're diverse in terms of cultural, racial, ethnic backgrounds, gender, sexuality, all these different things, right, that make us different. Everybody in the community is different some way, somehow. So we want to make sure we have that represented, and we also want to make sure that their voices are valued. So these different dialogue circles will meet up to 6 times. We have discussion guides that can be tailored towards any issue. One of our big guides is our race guide. Another guide that people like is our community police relations guide. Seeing a couple questions coming in. Yes, how do we approach this in big cities, and do we do it on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis? Yes, sometimes larger cities do adopt this, and usually what they do is they do break it up. I know out here in Hartford, right, where we're located, Hartford is separated by, neighborhoods. So what can happen is, as long as you make sure that you have different partners in each neighborhood, and each neighborhood can actually organize their own dialogue circle. When we did work in Ohio a couple of years ago, that was throughout the, in different cities. In each city, they did it by neighborhood basis as well. So yes. Yes, we have worked in rural areas. We were in Ottumwa, Iowa, a couple of years ago, and they did dialogue circles where they were focused on food security and things of that nature, and transportation. Transportation was a big one out there as well. So once we and for say for the Ottumwa, Iowa, we used one of the guys that we had created for New York program that Milana will talk a bit about later on, and we had adapted and edited it for that community's needs. So back to the 6 times is when they meet. In the first couple of sessions in the dialogue, those are on relationship building, and then the next couple of sessions of the dialogue, they're really focused on talking about the issue, our experiences with this issue, whether it be community police relations or food security or whatever. We're all looking at this from different lenses. So when we have our conversations, we want to be able to hear and respect other folks' approach and why they think the way they think about these things, right? So one of the things I want to talk about is, since we do have facilitators that we train them in what we call neutral facilitation. So when I say we're doing neutral facilitation during these dialogues, what does neutral facilitation mean to you? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that. I have another question came in. Since neighborhoods and cities tend not to be diverse, would you recommend sometimes? Oh, that's thank you, Douglas Walker, for that question. We'll write that down and answer that at the end. I'll write that down right now. Okay, so we have not leading to a particular side for neutral facilitation, not showing the position on the issue. All right. Yes, the facilitator is not the one with the wisdom. The group is. I like that. Okay. Thank you. Yes, fair and neutral. Yes, it's not biased. Supportive and safe. I like that one, from Elizabeth. It's supportive and safe. So I appreciate that. Oh, wait, there's one more. Use the word empathy, and I love when people talk about empathy. Neutrality. All right. Empathy, not sympathy. True. Great, great. So when we say neutral facilitation, some of you all were hitting it right on the head. It's not about taking sides. The facilitator is there to guide the conversation and to maintain the focus and making sure that we're staying on task. As I said, we're using a discussion guide to move through this conversation. But as a facilitator, I'm not supposed to say, I believe in this or I don't believe in that, because as someone mentioned, that could lead to bias, and that may make someone who disagrees with me feel shut down. And my role as a facilitator is to make sure that they are heard, right? It's about the people who are participants, them heard and respected. So I like that you all were, on point with that. And empathy, not sympathy, I love that. I'm probably going to start incorporating that when I start doing these. And then the last stage that we do is action. When I was talking about the discussion guide, the first 2 sessions about relationship building, to about the issue. The last couple of sessions focus on how do we want to address this issue, right? So once we figure out how we want to address this issue, each dialogue circle comes up with, say, 3 or so action ideas. And then, say, if you have 3 different dialogue circles going on, everybody who's participating in those circles come together in an action form, which is another larger community celebration. And what they get to do is see all of the different action ideas that different groups have worked on. And then they get to vote on, well, which one of these are we ready to move forward with? And then once we know that we are going to work on, 3 different action ideas from all these different groups, we want to pick one that's, a short-term goal, a mid-term goal, and we want to have a long-term goal, right? So then once we do that, we do an action planning training. This is another major training that we do, and this is another all-day training. What we do is we help the action teams come up with foundations so how they can lay a plan, right? You say, we want to achieve this goal. Well, what are some of the pieces we need in place to achieve this goal? And who else do we need to invite to the table that we may not have invited already? If we haven't really engaged certain service providers, how are we going to do that now? Certain elected officials, how are we going to do that, et cetera? Who do we need on board to get this moving? And then we just work on planning and implementation. While everyday democracy, even though, like I said, we're going to be providing coaching throughout the entire process. So at any point, if someone on the action team or the organizing team has any burning questions, or they may not be sure about, how to engage a certain group or something like that, we're always available. And we also have tools and such on our website. Hopefully, you all visit that as well. Oh, and also all of the tools on our website are open source, so you can download them. We do ask that you sign up for our newsletter because we like to stay in contact with folks. I appreciate you all who joined because you received that email. So now, Milana will talk a little bit about results of community dialogues. And, yeah.
All right, great. So like Sagasti kind of laid out, we go through the organizing, the dialogue, and the action. And we do put a big emphasis on the action just to make sure that people know this is not just about talking. We're also, really want to see people moving towards action. But we also want to recognize that just from the dialogue, there are results that come out of that. So, for example, we are creating an open space for people to talk about difficult issues. So I think in our society right now, it's pretty hard, we're very polarized, and so it can be hard to imagine that we could have a productive dialogue about particular issues like racism or poverty, community police relations. So really providing that space with the neutral facilitation to have those conversations on difficult issues, and maybe even to diffuse tensions between different groups that have opposing viewpoints. Hearing from community members who don't usually have a voice. So there may be community members who come to the dialogue who feel like they never really had a chance to speak on a particular issue. They didn't feel like they were an expert on that, but through the dialogue and through being valued for their own experience, and knowing that they are an expert on their own experience, they may come to realize that they really do have a voice, and that leaving the dialogue really feeling like they could make a difference in their community. And also, like I said, creating that space to come up with the action ideas, and action ideas on different levels. So the individual, the community, collective action, and also the institutional and policy change. So, like I said, there's on the individual level of change, we see people dispelling their stereotypes. So they might come into the dialogue feeling like they know something about a particular group, or having a stereotype or bias about a particular group, and then by really hearing their own experience, they might leave the dialogue kind of dispelling that stereotype. Also building those deeper relationships. So Sagasti was talking about even getting to know your neighbors. So people might come into the dialogue never having talked to people who live right down the street from them, but being able to build those deeper relationships with all different kinds of people in their community really strengthens the community and makes it possible to accomplish some other change as well. And then personal learning and growth, so really learning both from other people's experiences, but also sometimes from the facts. So in our discussion guide, people do come up with local fact sheets sometimes to present, like, what is some of the data. So you get a chance to talk about both your own personal experiences and get that picture of the storytelling, but also of the actual data around that issue. And also new leaders can emerge from the dialogue. So people, we had one person in Boulder, Montana, who actually didn't feel like a leader before they took part in these dialogues. They were talking about poverty and came out and decided to run for mayor and were elected as mayor of Boulder, Montana. So on the collective action side, we're really talking about projects, so community projects. This is where the community decides to come together and take on a project like a community garden, a multicultural center, a neighborhood cleanup, trust building forums between police and youth. And this could be really all different kinds of projects. It's just what the community decides that they want to take on as part of that dialogue. And a lot of times it's where the community decides to pool their resources. So at the end of the discussion, they're thinking about assets, like what are some of the assets that they have in their community, both personally, but also that the community offers. And so there's one example in South Dakota where there was a man and people were talking about how they really needed a youth center, a place for the youth to hang out in their community. and somebody in the dialogue had an old car dealership that hadn't been used. It was a building that hadn't been used for a long time, and he decided to donate it. And they were able to start this youth center with very little resources. You know, other people donated other resources that they had to make it work. So kind of thinking about that too, like what are the assets and resources that are already there that you might not necessarily need a lot of money, external kind of funding to make happen. And then the institutional and policy change. So I think we know that this is the longest kind of change. It's the hardest to accomplish, and it really does take a long time and a lot of people. So some of the examples of this level of change are embedded community engagement. So you might see people deciding to do more dialogues, to really embed that within an institution. We saw in Montgomery County, Maryland, they have been doing now for maybe even 20 years, they've been doing dialogues within the school district on multiple levels. So they have dialogues with the students about racism and the achievement gap. They also have conversations between, you know, teachers and students, parents and students, teachers and parents, the faculty, other people who work in the district. I was at a training where they actually had, you know, people who were working as bus drivers taking part in these conversations. So really on all levels, thinking about how do you embed this process where people get to have a voice and participate more fully. And more equitable hiring practices. So this is something we've seen come out of some of the dialogues. And also racial equity trainings for employees. So kind of thinking beyond, like having gained some knowledge from the dialogues, how do we bring this knowledge to other people? How do we provide these trainings to make sure that people in these institutions kind of know, are really using that racial equity lens? So one other specific example, I know somebody asked the question about how this is used in cities, and so this example is in New York City. There was a community that had a program called Food, Faith, and Health, and they were looking at food and health disparities in New York City. They had a one-day summit where they brought together people from all over the city. They had about 150 people participate in dialogues about food insecurity and looking at food deserts in New York City. So a food desert is where people might not have access to affordable, healthy food in their own neighborhood. And so they had these conversations, and one thing that was unique about this is that they had already really built a coalition to partner with some of the local government, and they were able to have all of the actions that came out of this dialogue were able to be implemented into Plan YC, which was a sustainability plan for the entire city. And so they really built that in from the beginning to make sure that along with the action ideas that came out of it, that they were able to be already impacting policy change. And then they also had action teams, just like all of the other communities. They also had these action teams that were working on different projects. So one of them was educating people on the Farm Bill and other legislation related to food. And another is developing incentives for people to make healthy food choices. So, you know, they were able to so that's one thing to really think about is like from the beginning, how do you build this into your process? Build in so that this can be sustainable and so it can impact action and change on different levels. So we have one other question for you. We want to hear from you about, you know, having heard this whole presentation and orientation, what community issues are you thinking about that you could address with this approach? So I'll give you a minute to write in.
Yes, and we have seen a couple of your questions come through. We haven't quite answered those yet, so we will get to those during the question section. So thank you for those questions that you sent in.
All right, so I see homelessness from Alan, lack of affordable housing, and racist mascot and logo. Confronting racism related to monuments. So I'm seeing some related issues here. Food insecurity as well, housing for homeless, LGBTQ youth. classism, and education, student engagement, child welfare, income inequality in rural America, and access to family planning, language issues, and people learning how we can be well-balanced, good members of society. All right, those are really interesting. I see a lot of related things here, and one of the things that we work with communities on is how to frame your issue. So, all of these are really important, and then how do you think about, how do you make that issue relatable to the broadest amount of people and to the people who are most impacted by that issue? So it can still be the issue, but how do you frame it in a way that is appealing and makes people want to come to that conversation? So sometimes, for example, a community might decide to address racism head on, and another time somebody might decide, okay, let's talk about homelessness, but through that racial equity lens, really making sure that we do put some emphasis on racism, but we want to put the main emphasis on homelessness. So it really depends on the community. And then some communities have decided to talk about, for example, food insecurity, but then they realize that, the deeper issue that they really need to talk about is racism, and it kind of helps them get to that point of talking about racism. So, thank you all for answering.
So, any questions? You want to get to the ones that were sent in earlier first? I'm guessing.
I have one here.
All right. So we have. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So I have one question, and I can't remember who this is from, but somebody had asked a question about in larger cities, doing dialogues by neighborhood, and then if the neighborhoods are not as diverse, when do you decide whether to create groups that are across neighborhoods to make sure that the conversations are diverse? I guess my response would be that I think it really depends on the issue you're focusing on and what you're trying to influence. So if you're trying to influence something on the neighborhood level, then you might decide to do that just by neighborhood. If you're doing it across neighborhoods, then it might be more appropriate to make sure that the dialogues are mixed, to make sure that there's that diversity. For example, if you're trying to impact like all of city, city policies, you might want to do that instead.
Yes, definitely. Because one of the things that when we say, you want a good diverse group, right? Automatically we go to, things like skin color, et cetera, right? But it's also about there may be diversity within a seemingly homogenous group, right? So just because it's, a primarily white neighborhood or primarily black neighborhood or whatever have you, it's about talking about the issue in a way with those people that get them to consider other perspectives. And then hopefully those alternative perspectives rise from the group, and that comes with, having trained facilitators pull from the group. So we have a question here that says, how do you help white people in particular engage with their whiteness in diverse settings? How do you reconcile or balance their safety with the safety of non-white group members, particularly in the dialogue process? Let me get to that one, and then there's another question that says, asking about our racial equity training and what that looks like. So I'm taking these together because they seem a little bit similar. We do offer a racial equity training, which is, another, I'm not sure if that's a full day or a half a day training, but it's pretty much, talking about all these different aspects of racial dynamics to watch out for, making sure you're not giving too much time for, the white male in the room, things of that nature. But what we do is not that because we embed our racial equity lens in every aspect of our work, even if you don't do the racial equity training, and you still get to learn all these different racial dynamics to look out for, and all these facilitation techniques that we train folks on, and that when done well and done correctly, that's what addresses the how do white people approach their whiteness in a diverse setting, because we begin to start talking openly and honestly about these things even before we get to the dialogues. So then that way the facilitator, first we do it with the organizing team, so they understand that when you're pitching this to people, they understand that this is going to be about inclusiveness, right? Then when we do the facilitator training with the facilitators, they're learning about different group dynamics and how certain behaviors can come out during the dialogue process. So then by the time we get to the dialogues, someone who doesn't have that background, the facilitator is already looking for these things. And then within the dialogue process, each dialogue circle creates what they call ground rules. Some people call them different names. I've heard ground rules, I've heard group agreements, group norms, things like that. So once that gets developed at the beginning of the dialogue circles, that's when you start to say we make sure we're respecting everybody, right? We're sharing airtime, not one person gets to dominate the conversation, things of that nature. So then that way, when we see white privilege manifesting in a certain way in the group, we're able to actually call that out and not feel as though we're being judged. Someone mentioned earlier the facilitator's job is about creating a safe space, right? So we're doing that and creating a safe space, but making sure that we're clear for it's a safe space for everyone, if that helps answer the question.
And I would just add to that also with our race guide, we developed an affinity guide. So you can really think about the dynamics in your community. And for example, there might be a community that where you feel like you really need to have that affinity dialogue before you can jump into having that more diverse conversation on race, because we know that these conversations can be divisive and hard to have, challenging. So you might decide that for your community, maybe there's something really big that just happened and people aren't ready to talk about it in that diverse space yet. And so we have a guide where white community members could have that conversation about race on their own, and then also affinity groups based on other racial backgrounds. So one for Asians, Latinos, Black, Native, can also have that conversation kind of in their own group before they kind of enter into that more diverse conversation.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So we have a question that's saying, how are dialogue participants chosen, invited, or included? That's pretty much up to that organizing group. The people who are, like I mentioned earlier, doing a lot of the logistics and planning. It's about reaching out to someone who knows someone who knows someone, and kind of how some of you came to our webinar. Somebody sent you an email, or somebody gave you a personal invite. That's how we do that. And some of it is playing the political game and figuring out who really needs to be in the circle to make sure that someone, if you're talking about education, you might want to have, definitely have some teachers or someone from the school board or someone from the teachers union, things like that. You'll want to definitely, do. And then you also want to be clear that, we want, everyday mothers, fathers, and students involved in this as well. So we think of it, think of it from that perspective when we're talking about who gets invited.
Yeah, and also, you really don't want to exclude people from the dialogue, but one way that you can think about, make sure that the dialogue is diverse is by over-recruiting underrepresented groups. So we know that there are barriers to access to participating in things for certain groups, people of color, maybe people who are low income, youth. So you might have to over-recruit for those groups so that then you actually get the representation.
Yes, excellent. Oh yeah, and also with that is sometimes we find people who don't already have a strong relationship in traditionally marginalized communities, you may have to be working on that relationship for a while before you get to the point where they're now willing to be able to join your coalition or join your organizing team, because you do want to make sure that people go places where they already have some level of trust with one or two people who are there. So relationship building is very big throughout the entire process, through the dialogues as well as the planning and organizing phase. Talking about more about the facilitator, someone asked, can we talk more about the facilitator training? It's an all-day training. I'm trying to think of something. We focus on listening activities, really being able to read, engage the room, who's disinterested. Maybe they're not speaking because they're quiet, different things like that. We also do practice facilitation. So we have exercises where, we'll have, someone practicing the facilitation. We'll have, one or two plants, one person is supposed to be, the difficult person who's always disagreeing, things of that nature, just to keep the facilitator on their toes. So in a really quick bullet point nutshell, that's what our facilitator looks like. And we, as I mentioned before, we also focus on, racial dynamics to look out for, listening, practicing facilitation. Am I leaving out anything big?
No, just the racial equity, neutrality.
Neutrality.
And then we're also working with the guide that the community is going to use. So part of it is really going through the guide. It could be something that we already developed, or it could be something that the community developed, that we kind of partnered with them to help them develop that. And so you want the facilitators to really get familiar with that, both practicing but also walking through, like, what is the purpose of each of these sessions and the flow.
Yes, excellent point. Oh, good, well, I'm so good. So do we have other tools you can use in addition to the dialogue guides? Yes, we do have discussion guides, but we also have online tools as well. Like I said, if you visit our website, we have many different things, how to recruit, younger folks, how to keep younger folks interested, tons of tools. We have our organizing guide, our facilitator training guide online as well. So we have a lot of things like that. Right, still scrolling through these questions.
How do you handle those who don't agree with the majority on proposed actions? It's like, so I think it's actually interesting that going through this dialogue, one of the things is that you really are creating this common vision. And so it's kind of helping people get to the root of what people really feel about this issue, really working through on every week for 6 weeks, you get a chance to really air some of those concerns. What's the root of the problem? What are some of the approaches? So by the time you get to actions, it's interesting that you're not all on the same page, but there's some common vision, some common ideas about, wanting to make this community stronger, wanting to address the issue. And so, and then you get to form action teams. So somebody might not agree or might not be that passionate about a particular action, but they could decide to work on a different action. In the end, people are usually voting, but they have 3 votes to put onto different actions. And so the actions are created by the group, by the small group. And so hopefully at the end, you'll have something that you are interested in. And if not in your small group, there's also, 10 other groups that decided on action ideas. And so typically people are usually interested in one of the actions, and they decide that they want to get involved with the one that they're most passionate about. They might not agree with all of them.
Yes. All right, so we have a question here about how does Everyday Democracy maintain quality over years of projects happening throughout the country, of trainings, programs, facilitators, et cetera. Pretty much what we do is we have, a core network of folks who do our community work, and what we try to do on a regular basis is stay in contact with them. But when we're doing any community program, we receive, what we call activity reports, so we know what's going on with who, when, and, the different dynamics and challenges within that one program. And then we look at this, over a period of time and see what are some of the patterns that we're seeing, as well as we bring those, the people who are doing our network consultants who do the work, we bring them together for what we call learning exchanges, and we see what are some of the different things that you've noticed and seen throughout the communities that you've been working in this past year or so. And we get to, share, build ideas. We update some of our tools, something that worked really well 3 years ago. We may need to tweak it a little bit, things of that nature. And we also, we just continuously share information with one another.
And we also have an evaluation team on staff.
Yes.
And so they're also helping with that and creating surveys, creating evaluation plans for all of our initiatives.
Yes, and our racial equity training, easy question. No, it is not done online. For the most part, when we do trainings, we like to do them face-to-face in person. We do have, different, like I said, tools and handouts and things like that on our website, but we're moving more into doing webinars online, but not necessarily a training online. I wouldn't want to say you've received a well put together training through an online mechanism. At least not yet. We're not quite there. So we do have a lot of other questions. Sorry to say we won't be able to get to all of them. So what we will do is we have your names and emails we should have all your emails on file. So we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can, because we don't want to leave anyone hanging. So just to continue on, you can contact us here. Once again, I mentioned, downloading our free resources on our website. And if you're interested in working with us or you have any more questions, that's my contact information in the middle paragraph there, M. Walker. Most people call me Sagacity because there's 1,000 Matthews, but there's only one Sagacity. So feel free to email me if you want to start a program with us, or if you just want to learn more, have any other questions, things of that nature. where I always love talking to people over the phone. Email is the best way to set up an appointment with me, but I love phone conversations. And then lastly, if you're interested in becoming an anchor partner, which, as I mentioned before, that's an organization that would like to embed some of our skills and practices into what you already do. We're open to begin that conversation, and for that, you could talk to our colleague Val Ramos at vramos@everydaydemocracy.org, and you can speak to him about that. Again, you don't need to have to write all this down because we'll be sending you the recording of this. And in conclusion, some ways that you can get involved. We're going to be working on our education and criminal justice initiatives. Particularly in criminal justice, we have updated our community police discussion guide. So what we're looking for now is people who are willing to pilot the guide. So if you're interested in that, please contact me. That would be great. Anybody, if you're able to put together, police and community members to come together and have this conversation, that would be excellent. And we'll also be launching our Strong Starts guide, the guide that Milana referenced earlier, which has to deal with early childhood education. And we're also launching our Fellows program, which is what I mentioned earlier, our network consultants who are doing the community work. Those are people, when you're talking about, how do you train folks and stuff, that would be part of the Fellows program, is learning, how to do the training. It's sort of like a train-the-trainer type of model that we're working off of. So if you have any questions about these, again, feel free to contact us. And here is our office and, our general contact information at any time. Always reach out, and we hope you've enjoyed your time with us today. I know I've liked the questions. I liked the conversation. I think the flow was wonderful.
Yeah, and thank you all again for spending an hour with us to learn about our process. We look forward to hearing more from you. I think somebody had a question about the slides and the recording, and just so you know, there will be a recording being sent out. It's being sent out automatically from GoToWebinar, so you should be receiving that very shortly, and it will be a recording with the slides attached.
Yes, the recording with the slides. Oh, yes, and also please fill out the survey at the end of this. All right.
All right, have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.